Hello and welcome back to another update as I cover the latest developments throughout the front line in the Russo-Ukrainian war. It's your host Weep Union, and in this one we start out here to the northwest of Avdiivka. The Ukrainians have launched a counterattack towards Berdeshi, regaining positions within the village, and this is shown by this recent footage from Russian sources showing Russian TOS systems launching attacks towards those positions here in the western parts of Berdeshi. The Ukrainians continue to hold their positions in the western parts of Berdeshi after a recent map correction. It was previously believed that the Russians held control over the western parts of Berdeshi due to the release of a Ukrainian video where they were heavily shelling the whole western parts of Berdeshi. However, it has now become clear that the Ukrainians withdrew from the area, baiting the Russians into it before launching artillery shells and heavy explosions MLR strikes on those positions before re-entering and taking up their positions again. It is unclear how successful that operation was, but with this we see that the confirmation is now that the Ukrainians hold the western parts and have now re-entered the western parts of the central parts of Berdeshi. Fighting continues in the direction of Semenivka as well, where Russian rumors have claimed that the village has been captured, but I'm waiting for either geolocated confirmation or verified information of that happening. Moving further north here by Novobakhmutivka, the Russians have advanced both within the village of Ocheretyne and to the south of Novobakhmutivka. The Russians are here expanding their zone of control west of the railways towards Ocheretyne and Novobakhmutivka. The objective of the Russians here is to gain access closer to Novobakhmutivka. They now have control over 3 roads directly to it. The main road here to the southeast of Novobakhmutivka, moving through towards the village, the road to the north through Ocheretyne, and the forest lines here to the south of Novobakhmutivka. The Ukrainians have one supply route in and out of the village. The Russians would like to launch infantry assault groups from the southern parts, moving through the forest areas towards Novobakhmutivka to assault the village from the south. At the same time, it is likely that they will launch armored assaults from the east and from the north through their control over the area. In the northern parts, the main focus will be fighting through Ocheretyne, but this will mainly be an infantry job, while the armored vehicles can move through from anywhere of the northern to eastern parts of Novobakhmutivka through the roads to attempt to gain a foothold within Novobakhmutivka, and this can be combined with infantry assaults from the south. In the eastern parts by Novokalinove, we see that the Russians have slightly expanded their zone of control in the eastern direction towards gaining control of the forest lines here to the northwest of the railways, securing the northeastern flank before they storm further within Novokalinove to gain control over the central parts of the village. Offensive operations by the Russians continue in the northern flank of Avdiivka, while the Ukrainians are trying to strengthen their positions by Berdeshi. And this is a very difficult position for them to hold on to, as long as the Russians have their presence in the north, cutting off supplies for the Ukrainians in Berdeshi, and in the southern parts the road has been cut there as well. The Ukrainians are mainly relying on the forces they have available in the area, and also forces moving through the fields to reach Berdeshi and Semenivka. To the south, in the direction of Krasnoyarivka, there is this video here showing heavy bombardment of the city. This is now a daily basis event. The Russians are constantly shelling Krasnoyarivka both with the air force and artillery, which is why we constantly get videos like this of heavy bombing of Krasnoyarivka. A bit further south we see here in the direction of Ocheretyne, the Russians have restarted offensive operations, launching attacks towards this small building here to the south of the village, and with this we see that the Russians have restarted offensive operations in the direction of Ocheretyne. After positional fighting continuing by the forest area for the past few days and weeks, the Russians have now sent a few soldiers to occupy the building south of Ocheretyne, and likely going to launch further operations, probing into the Ukrainian defenses in the area, and likely starting an assault soon following that. Moving up north in the direction of Bakhmut, we see that there is this small advance west of Ivanivska in the direction of the canal. The Russians are slowly pushing westwards of Ivanivska towards the canal in an attempt of gaining control of the eastern bank, the forest areas to the east bank of the canal, and to gain closer access to the crossing here in the southern flank of Chasiv Yar across the canal through the forest area. The Russians are here looking to develop their offensive operations to a position where they have a secure flank and can start launching operations directly towards Chasiv Yar and across the canal. For that, they would need to gain full control over the eastern parts of the canal, or simply ignore those parts, move through, and start fighting by Chasiv Yar. However, that would leave their southern and northern flanks vulnerable in comparison to them securing the front line by the canal. In the direction of Chasiv Yar, there is this video here showing heavy bombardment of that city as well. Similar to Counterattack, we see constant efforts by the Russians to heavily bombard all Ukrainian positions of their armed forces ahead of their offensive operations where they assault the various areas. The current strategy of the Russians is to gain a foothold within a village or a city, where they then heavily bombard it, similar to Ocheretyne and Chasiv Yar, but also in the small scales like in Berdishi and Semenivka, where the Ukrainians constantly launch counterattacks and attempts to hold on to the villages and cities, even if the defensive positions are not advantageous for them, considering, for example, here in the direction of Ocheretyne, if the Russians manage to gain control over the fortifications here to the south and east of the village, they'll be able to hold on to the residential areas in the southern parts of the village, while at the same time they will heavily bombard the northern areas. As long as the Ukrainians keep sending reinforcements to the area, they will be heavily bombarded. Of course, the Ukrainians can also launch strikes on the Russian positions. However, the Russians have a 10-to-1 artillery advantage. So that is the biggest issue of the Ukrainians with their current strategy, is their firepower disadvantage. Now, the United States has finally set their aid package to vote, and in that regard, there is this information about it. First off, the vote took place today and it has gone through. This means a $60 billion aid package to Ukraine has gone through. However, the split of this $60 billion or $61 billion, 23 will go to replenishing US arsenals, $11 billion for current US military operations in support of Ukraine, and another $14 billion is planned to be spent on the purchase of advanced weapons systems that was not previously in service with the American Army. What this means is that the majority, the $23 billion, will likely go to the systems that Ukraine is in need of, that the United States already has available to send to Ukraine, like armored vehicles, tanks, artillery shells, ammunition, air defense, etc. While $11 billion for current US military operations are likely the scouting missions, the air reconnaissance, satellite imagery, etc., all of the technological and information aid the United States is giving Ukraine. And finally, the $14 billion will go to other countries to send aid to Ukraine. This is likely in the form of Patriot defense systems going to Ukraine. It is likely that the United States will have some of its allies that have bought Patriot systems from the United States to send them to Ukraine, and then they will replenish it with this money. As for when it will arrive, the Pentagon has already prepared these. As is written in this article by Washington Post from yesterday, Ukraine weapons package ready to go once aid bill clears Congress, where in this article they talk about how some of the aid to be sent to Ukraine is already ready, such as the artillery shells that is needed to be sent to Ukraine. There's also the Czech initiative to sending artillery shells to Ukraine. The United States may put some money for that, and it is likely that they will also try to produce or increase their production of their own shells to send to Ukraine. This means that the shell shortage of the Ukrainians will likely not continue, but rather than them being on par with the Russians will likely at most have a 2 or 3 to 1 advantage compared to the current 10 to 1 advantage that they have when it comes to artillery firepower. This aid package will help Ukraine partially even out the front line. It is likely that the Russians will still have a significant advantage across the front, especially since this long period of time with little aid to Ukraine has grinded down the advanced and experienced soldiers that the Ukrainians have available, especially with Commander Syrsky's tactics, forcing the Ukrainians to stand and defend areas that are less defendable and more vulnerable with less ammunition than they need. This has created more casualties for the Ukrainians and made the difficult situation even more so. It will also likely mean that the Ukrainian army will not collapse in 2024 and instead will be able to hold on for at least yet another year, as they will be able to receive a lot of tanks, armored vehicles, and ammunition to hold the front line. So as long as manpower lasts, they'll be able to hold the front, or at least be able to defend major cities and prevent a major Russian offensive, unless one of two things happen. The first thing would be if the Russians launch their offensive operations prior to the aid really getting and arriving to Ukraine, or the second part, that the Ukrainians simply continue this battle of attrition. They continuously lose their men and manpower, their equipment, their artillery, everything through this fighting that is taking place, and the Russians simply continue building up their army faster than they themselves are losing, while grinding down the Ukrainian army faster than they are building theirs, which will eventually lead to this same result, just at a later time. So the conclusion for this aid package is that it will help Ukraine survive for longer, but it will not turn the situation around. And that is going to be all for this update. Thank you all for watching. Make sure to leave a like, subscribe, and check out my Patreon for additional content. Thank you all for watching, and have a great day.